Alrighty, well, it's about 2:05 in the afternoon on the East Coast, so we'll go ahead and get started. Good afternoon, this is Brian Sukup, Vice President of Government and Public Affairs for the American Society of Interior Designers. Welcome to ASID's bi-monthly public policy webinar series presented by the ASID Government and Public Affairs Department. ASID believes that to be good advocates for the interior design profession, we must be informed on all public policy issues that affect or are affected by interior designers. That's why every other month, ASID is committed to bringing you public policy content relevant to the industry and profession. Today's webinar is eligible for 1 credit of continuing education through IDCEC. Today's webinar is titled LEED version 4.1 Insights into LEED's Newest Update. It is guest hosted by the United States Green Building Council's Corey Enck. Corey is USGBC's Vice President of LEED Technical Development. In this role, he collaborates with volunteer technical committees and industry stakeholders to evolve and refine USGBC's LEED Green Building Rating System. For the last few years, he's been focused on the development and launch of LEED v4.1. Previous to his technical development work, Corey managed USGBC's certification team. Prior to joining USGBC, Corey worked in building system design and energy management. He holds a mechanical engineering degree from the University of Pennsylvania and is a LEED accredited professional. All lines are currently muted, but if you have questions, please use the question box function during the presentation, and we will try to answer as many questions as possible at the end of the program. Without any further delay, ASID would like to welcome USGBC's Corey Enck.
Yes, thank you, Brian. So we can get started. LEED version 4.1. So we wanted to take this opportunity to share a little bit about the latest version of LEED. LEED version 4 was launched a couple years ago, and version 4.1 is our newest update. And we'll share a little bit about why we're updating it now and some of the major themes behind this change, and then dig into a little bit of the detail around how this rating system will actually affect project teams and designers, and what some of the specific changes are that those folks should be prepared for. But first, before I get into some of the detail, I usually like to start at a really high level in terms of just resetting everyone's ideas around USGBC and LEED. And if you hadn't heard in a while, USGBC's mission is on the screen here, basically to transform the built environment. So how can we do that? And the main way we do that, the main way we enable market transformation is through our LEED rating system. We do a lot of things. We do education, we do advocacy, and a few other things. But LEED is really the main tool we use for market transformation. And to give you a sense of the scale and really how successful it's been over the last couple of years, the last 20 years, here are some of our numbers. So 42,000 commercial projects that have been certified, which comprises over 7 billion square feet of certified space. That really means that we're certifying around 2.5 million square feet every day. So GBCI is looking at that much space during their certification reviews on a daily basis. And in terms of the sort of breadth of where LEED is, it is fairly global. So we do have certified projects in 167 countries at this point. And again, our goal really is market transformation. And I think as you've seen just in sort of reviewing some of those numbers, our scale is much bigger than it used to be. 10, 15, 20 years ago, LEED had a smaller following, so it was a little more adaptable and nimble in terms of how quickly we could make changes and how the market could absorb those changes. Because we have such a large stakeholder base now, we do need to be a little more focused with those changes that we make. And when we are making changes, it is affected globally too. So it's quite difficult to refine requirements that work not just in the U.S. but outside the U.S. too, in terms of pushing all markets to do a little better. But at the end of the day, the goal here at USGBC and the goal of LEED as a tool is market transformation. How can we make the best practices of today the standard practices of tomorrow? So how can we improve that built environment? And this is a graphic on the screen right now showing market transformation. So this is our goal. This is where we want to be. We want to every iteration of LEED, every version of LEED, we want to raise the bar. And you can see that as time progresses here on this graphic. We want to raise that bar to eventually get to a place where buildings do positively impact the environment. We know that's a conceptual goal. We're not sure exactly when we will get there, but we do know that each version does need to slowly raise the bar, and it's a question of how much we raise that bar that we have to ask ourselves. But the main thing here I'll point out is that each version, generally is harder. The LEED version 4 was harder than LEED 2009, which was harder than version 2 and 2.1 and 2.2. So there is an intention behind these version updates that we have. And generally, when you come out with a new version of LEED, projects will need to do a little more in order to get the same level of certification. And that's okay, and that's sort of the goal behind rating system design and how we launch these rating systems. So we think it's important that the market understands that, but it's also on us to understand where the market is so that new rating system can be adopted reasonably well by the market. The other thing I'll mention here is the bottom of the graph, so codes. I think it's important that LEED understand where building codes are and where some of the sort of more progressive building codes are, the green building codes, because LEED really does need to sort of define the upper end of the market in terms of what leadership is, whereas codes are defining that floor. And as time goes on, codes have eventually progressed and gotten better and better. LEED needs to recognize that and recognize that every few years we need to improve just to make sure that we are staying above codes and that we are providing a goal for projects to shoot towards. So there is a relationship between codes. As codes get better, LEED has to improve as well. And we've seen lots of green building codes out there in the market, which has been exciting. We also think that's part of the transformation that LEED has been to help influence those codes and improve those codes. So that brings us to LEED version 4.1, and LEED version 4.1 is just an incremental change over version 4. We've done these incremental changes before. We've had LEED versions 2.1 and 2.2. So in general, I'd like to say that you don't necessarily need to relearn LEED. So LEED version 4.1 isn't entirely different than version 4. If you have learned version 4, if you're familiar with version 4, then you'll really just need to understand the few changes that we made in this rating system. And that's important to know. This is not a full overhaul of the rating system. This really does just give us an opportunity to make some changes. But placing 4.1 along the spectrum of LEED, you can see here on our screen, it is the next evolution, and it continues this sort of progression towards improving the LEED rating system. In version 1, the rating system was fairly simplified, fairly simple. It was very strategy-based. We basically got our committees together in a room and put together what we thought were a set of strategies that defined green building, and then we put them in a rating system. In 2009, we realized that in order to be more transformational, we should start to prioritize those strategies. Some are better than others. Which ones do we think are better? And to do that, we weighted the rating system. So we made the rating system based on 100 points, which allowed us to give more points to strategies that we thought were more important, that met our goals, and fewer points to those strategies that we thought did not directly impact our most important goals. So that made us make some hard decisions around what's in and what's out of the rating system, which I think has ultimately led to a better rating system. Version 4, which was launched in November of 2013, was a fairly large overhaul of LEED. And that rating system was outcome oriented. So we like to say it's we took into consideration the outcomes that we wanted to see from buildings and from projects, and we worked our way back and said how do we get these outcomes, and how do we write credits so that we can get those outcomes. And we did make the rating system more performance based. So we essentially wanted to correlate the actual benefit that you get from a credit or from LEED, and more highly correlate that with the achievement of that credit. I'll give one small example. In LEED, we have in our new construction rating system, we have a credit for bike racks. Installing bike racks, changing rooms, having showers. That's a credit that has been much maligned over the years in terms of just install a bike rack and get a point for LEED, even though it does have some fairly large benefits. It does reduce vehicle miles traveled, it does potentially improve human health and enhance the community quality of life. But there is some truth behind projects that were just installing a bike rack and getting a point when no one was actually riding their bikes to the building. So that was sort of the problem we tried to solve with version 4. How do we make those credits more meaningful? So if you achieve it, it actually means that you've received the good outcomes, the benefits of those strategies. And in version 4, for example, we made a small tweak to that credit. We did not only require bike racks, changing rooms, and showers, but we also said that in order to earn that credit, you needed to be in a bikeable area. So the likelihood of occupants actually riding their bikes to the building was higher if you were in a bikeable area. And we defined that in many different ways. But that's essentially the idea behind the version 4 rating system in terms of focusing on outcomes and trying to make it more likely that projects actually realize those outcomes if they achieve a LEED credit. Version 4.1 builds on those themes of version 4 in terms of being performance-based and focusing on outcomes, but it really does also allow us to make some small updates and to learn some lessons from the last couple of years of what's worked and what hasn't worked with version 4. It also allows us to update some of our standards. And one of the things that we did before developing version 4.1 was really to set goals for this update. It is important to keep this rating system update very focused. We did not want this rating system update to get too large, so that projects would need to sort of relearn a whole rating system. So we set these goals, these 4 goals: ensure leadership, increase achievability, expand the market, and improve performance. And I'll quickly run through these. Ensure leadership, this is basically the theme or the goal behind LEED in general. And every update of LEED, we want to make sure that this is the first goal, ensuring leadership. So over the last couple of years, where has LEED fallen behind? 4.1 gives us an opportunity to really correct some of those credits or areas where we might have fallen behind. I think a good example is energy performance. In version 4, we're referencing an energy code from 2010, which is quite old. Obviously, it's time to update that. So to be the most relevant green building rating system out there, what credits like that do we need to update to sort of keep pace with the market and keep pace with leadership? So that's always our first goal when updating the LEED rating system. But for 4.1, we also had a fairly important goal of increasing achievability. And I'll show you another slide here. What that generally means is, how do we balance the needs of the market with the needs for environmental solutions? Because if that balance tips too far on one side, then LEED fails to become an effective tool for market transformation. So, for example, if LEED is too easy, everyone can adopt it, but we're really not meeting our sort of environmental mission. If LEED becomes too hard, no one can adopt it, the market can't adopt it at all, and we're still not meeting our mission because no one's using these credits. So there is a delicate balance or a creative tension that exists between the market and the rating system And finding that sweet spot is really where we need to be as a voluntary rating system. So one thing that we did when looking at version 4.1 is take a look at our credit achievement data from version 4. So version 4 had been out since 2013, and it was out as the only rating system from around 2016. So we do have many projects that are certified, and we did want to take a look at how successful some of those projects have been. So what you see on the screen here is basically a scorecard for an interiors project, which I should say this is an aggregate scorecard of all of our interiors projects that have certified under version 4. And this really shows us which credits are at a low achievement rate and which credits are at a high achievement rate. So as you can see here, there's a lot of red on the screen. Many of these credits are actually not being achieved at high levels, and that's something we need to fix, because those credits, if they're not being pursued, if they're not being earned, we're not really meeting our mission of market transformation at all. So during this 4.1 development, it really was an opportunity for us to go through and look at all of these credits that have low achievement and try to understand, is there something wrong here? Did we set the bar too high? Do we need to reduce that? Is there some other barrier that exists? Perhaps some of these credits have a cost barrier as a reason why they're not being pursued. So 4.1 really provides this great opportunity to go back and adjust some of these credits that maybe did have barriers to make them more achievable, because if no one's pursuing them, we're not really meeting our mission. So how can we kickstart that market transformation by making some adjustments to these credits? The third goal was expanding the market, and I think this is a goal that many rating systems had as well. How can we make LEED work for more projects and more project types? We are becoming more and more utilized outside the U.S., so how can we make LEED work for international projects? How can we add more international standards or use the right metrics that are more globally applicable? But also, and maybe more importantly, how can we make LEED work for more projects, whether that means more project types, more types of projects. So how can we make it work better for warehouses or data centers, etc.? But then also, how can we put more credits on the table for certain projects? And I think one example of that is in version 4, we introduced a couple new credits. One was for our new construction rating system around cooling towers. So we know that cooling towers were a big water end use for projects. So we added a credit in version 4 for cooling tower water efficiency. But one of the issues was that obviously not all projects have cooling towers. So that credit was just off the table for those projects that did not have cooling towers. So how can we rewrite that credit to make it more applicable to more projects, so that that is a point that projects can earn, and therefore the rating system becomes a little more achievable if more credits are applicable to more projects. So that helps us expand the market and ultimately expand our transformational abilities. And then the last goal of this technical development is really improving performance, and I mentioned that earlier in terms of just making this rating system more directly correlated with the benefits that we expect to see. So writing the rating system in a better way. But then that also means, how do we improve performance? How do we encourage projects to install the right equipment in their project to make sure that they can actually measure their building's performance? So install the right meters, monitors, have the right sensors in place, so that we actually know that post-occupancy these buildings are performing as expected. So that's, like I said, has been a goal for version 4 and continues to be a goal for version 4.1. And the system goals are definitely something we like to fall back on. So these LEED system goals are essentially the goals of the rating system, and I just bring these up to say that they have not changed for version 4.1. These were developed for version 4. These are the things that we care about. So the credits in the rating system are really just proxies for getting at these LEED system goals. So these are the same in 4.1, and I will also click to the next slide, which shows you how those system goals have been prioritized. So there are 7 system goals, and as you can see, climate change is our number 1 goal, followed by human health. So those are the top 2 goals, meaning that when we distribute points in the rating system, we try to distribute points for those credits that we think address our top goals more effectively. So you will see in the rating system that many of the credits that do start to address climate change and human health, such as our energy credits, are weighted more highly. So that's intentional. This sort of framework, the system goal framework, also allows us to go through the rating system and find out where we may have credits that are not very effective. So some credits might score very low when you use this sort of system goals framework, and those credits can be removed from the rating system or rewritten so that they do affect some of these system goals. But in general, these system goals remain the same for version 4.1. So on to timeline, and 4.1 was launched at the beginning of this year. So we launched our design and construction rating systems in January, which includes our building design and construction and our interiors design and construction rating systems. They were launched into a beta, so they are now currently a beta rating system. And this is the first time we've ever launched a rating system as a beta, and we think that there are many benefits to that. With version 4, we directly launched the rating systems into public comment, and then we balloted them. But that really didn't get us the feedback we wanted at the right time. And as a result, we went to 6 different public comment periods with version 4. So we think with 4.1, we can get this rating system out to the market faster, but more importantly, we can get projects using the rating system sooner so that they can start to give us that feedback before we actually enter the formal public comment and ballot process. So it is a beta now, which means that all of your feedback can directly go into changing the rating system, and we will be making updates to 4.1 on a quarterly basis. And I would say that by the end of the year, we will reevaluate whether we should keep the beta open or whether we've gotten enough feedback to move into our public comment phase. And once it is in public comment, we just have a little less flexibility in terms of making changes, but it is more formal, and we do sort of encourage projects or stakeholders to submit those comments, and we do give a formal response. Once it is a balloted rating system, then we will, then we can start to think about sunsetting version 4 and only having version 4.1. So what that allows us to do is really, assess when we think we can start to sunset version 4. And looking at the schedules now, I don't think we would sunset. I don't think we would close registration for version 4 until probably the end of next year. So that's the end of 2020. So version 4.1 and version 4 are going to be around for a while. But we think most projects will prefer to use 4.1 anyway. So that will be hopefully the preferred option for most projects. But anyway, 4.1 is available as a beta. We encourage all of you to take a look and give us feedback and possibly use it on one of your future projects. One way to use or 2 ways to use 4.1 right now as a beta is you can register a 4.1 project or upgrade a 4.1 project. But where we'll see most projects actually engaging with 4.1 is to substitute their credits. So you can still have a version 4 project and just substitute a few of the 4.1 credits on your version 4 project. And we're fairly flexible in terms of how that's used. So any credits are available to substitute, and you can substitute them at any point in time of your project. So even if you've submitted for review, you can still reach out and take a few credits from version 4.1 and use those on your version 4 project. So that's how we think we'll get a lot of feedback in terms of those version 4 projects starting to test out some of these 4.1 credits on their version 4 projects. Okay, so I will start to walk us through a couple of the major changes in version 4.1, and I'll focus on the interiors rating system, but many of the changes to that rating system are mirrored in our new construction or our building design and construction rating system. So like I said, I think one of the areas that we wanted to spend some time with in 4.1 was energy. We know that we probably have fallen behind, and we know that we need to start to upgrade some of those credits in version 4, and that's what we did in 4.1 with the energy and atmosphere category. So looking at the credit achievement data here for energy, excuse me, you can see that some of them are red. So 4 of those credits were in the red in terms of low achievement. So we really did take a look at those and figure out what we could do to fix those. So one of the areas that we did spend some time was the optimized energy performance and the minimum energy performance credits, which are worth a significant number of points. And one of the things we did was to upgrade the referenced standard for those. So now we are referencing ASHRAE 90.1 2016, which is the latest version of ASHRAE, which is around 12% more stringent than the previous version. So we do reference a newer energy standard. When you do choose the energy modeling pathway in interiors, you would be now using that newest ASHRAE standard. And if you do choose that modeling path, there are a few new things to also note. We do allow on-site renewables to count for the prereq, which is something that we haven't allowed in version 4 in the past. We did also have 2 new metrics, 2 new energy metrics, and this is a big deal in LEED. LEED has always used energy cost as the metric to define energy performance since the beginning. And 4.1 does, for the first time ever, introduce another metric. So now we have 2 metrics that we're using. 50% of the points go to energy cost, and 50% of the points go to greenhouse gas emissions. So that's something that obviously we feel does need to be more directly addressed within LEED. How can we more directly measure and address those GHG emissions? But as a result of introducing that metric, we've also recognized that some off-site renewables should also contribute to this credit. So now certain types of off-site renewables do actually count towards your energy model for your specific project. I will also say that we did update the prescriptive pathways for both the prereq and the credit here to be more applicable to more projects as well, specifically for interiors projects. So diving a little deeper into that energy metric, this is essentially how we've split out those 2 metrics. There's a points table for the energy cost and a points table for the greenhouse gas emissions metrics. Energy cost is still important because energy cost does still send some important market signals to buildings and to projects, because there are sort of time of use signals in terms of the demand charges you still get. So using energy at the right time is still a signal that's sent through energy cost. So energy cost not only incentivizes energy efficiency, but it also does incentivize using energy at the right times of day to harmonize with your grid. So we felt that those were still important, so we wanted to leave that as a metric. Greenhouse gas emissions, however, this is how we can start to directly measure our impacts on climate change, which we think are critically important. So that is something that's measured as well. 50% of the points are going to that. So with greenhouse gas emissions, however, that the second metric, the scales are slightly different, and we do, like I said, allow some off-site renewables to count for that for the first time ever. And I'll get into that in the next credit. So the renewables credit has also been updated. And one thing that we recognized with the market was that there are many different types of procurement strategies for renewables these days, and LEED was only recognizing on-site renewables and green power. So we weren't recognizing sort of the vast spectrum that existed between those two. So with 4.1, we combined both of those credits, the green power credit and the on-site renewables credit, into one credit that does now address more types of renewables. So we've split those renewables into 5 different tiers. Tier 1 is a higher impact renewable. Tier 5 is a lower impact renewable, and we're now giving points based on what types of renewables you have. So Tier 1 is still on-site. Tier 2 is off-site renewables in a desirable location, so whether that's close to your project or on a grid that has a high emissions factor. Tier 3 is off-site renewables that are new, so those are still within 5 years, built within 5 years, but off-site. Tier 4 is green E-RECs, so that's always been allowed within the green power credit, and Tier 5 are RECs that are not green E certified. So tiers 1 through 3 all count towards the optimized energy performance credit and count towards that greenhouse gas emissions metric. So the idea behind that is that, you know, if we really are starting to push for net zero buildings, we realize we're not going to get there through energy efficiency. And we're probably not going to get there through on-site renewables either. We are going to need to recognize some type of off-site renewable in order to get to those net zero goals. So LEED is starting to define what we think the highest impact off-site renewables are, and allowing projects to take credit for those off-site renewables towards their basically their building energy model. And then this next slide basically shows the tiers and the point structures that we set out there. So I would suggest taking a look at this rating system here if you are interested in how those tiers compare to each other. But essentially, you get more credit for Tier 1 and you get less credit for Tier 5. All right, so moving on to materials, and you'll see that, and maybe the next slide shows this, we did have significant red areas within this credit. So we did have many projects in version 4 that were having low achievement rates with many of these materials credits. And as you remember in version 4, we did make a fundamental shift in how we wrote the credits for materials. We shifted from single attribute criteria to multi-attribute criteria. That essentially meant that we moved away from things like recycled content and bio-based materials, and we moved towards more holistic measures of material performance. So we moved towards things like EPDs and assessing products from an LCA perspective. That, you know, one strong example that we can give for why we changed, you know, we were potentially incentivizing the wrong things. Recycled content is not necessarily the thing you want to incentivize all the time. A product that has 100% recycled content may also have, you know, 10 times the amount of energy or water that was used to create that product. So we really do have to start to assess these materials holistically, and that was the change we made in version 4. We also structured the category around this sort of life cycle thinking idea, you know, focusing on reuse first, which is still what we do, so you can still earn most of the points through reuse. Then moving on to, you know, assessing those materials and optimizing those materials, addressing things like human health and ecological health, and then finally, you know, thinking about end of life and waste management. So that's kind of how the category itself was structured. And then here is the credit achievement data. As you can see, everything is red except for the C&D waste management credit, and this is for interiors projects. We're obviously struggling here. Project teams are struggling with earning these credits. So one of the largest priorities for 4.1 was really trying to make these credits work for more projects. And I'll walk us through some of the changes we made for these materials credits. Just to start, the construction and demolition waste management credit, one thing that we did did change was that we reduced one of the material streams. So this credit in version 4 asked for projects to identify material streams, not only diversion from landfill, but also sort of separating that diverted material into different material streams so that it's higher value. Well, we now allow one less material stream if you are using a certified recycling facility. So that is an advantage that some projects can see. Moving on to the building product disclosure and optimization credits. This is the EPD credit. Previously, we required 20 EPDs, and we weighted them all differently. So some EPDs were worth a full point, some EPDs were worth half of a point, some EPDs were worth a quarter of a point. I think that was really confusing for a lot of projects. It meant that the goalpost was moving. So you would get 20 EPDs, but they wouldn't necessarily count as 20. They might count as 7. So you would need to get more. So we did sort of restructure this a little bit. So now all EPDs are worth 1. So you actually only need 20 EPDs instead of more than that, regardless of the different types of EPDs. And EPDs that are third-party certified are worth 1.5. So you can get a little bit of a bonus if you do have a third-party certified EPD. And one of the biggest pieces of feedback that I've been getting over the last couple of years was with interiors projects and the fact that the reduced materials that are used, some of these thresholds were just too high. So we did lower that threshold for ID&C projects to 10 products. So previously that was 20. So interiors projects now only need to get 10 products in order to earn this one. And like I said, they're all weighted the same, so each EPD is only worth 1 product. So you do only need 10 full EPDs. And then the second option of this EPD credit was entirely unachievable for most projects. I think we had 1 project earn it over the last 6 years. So obviously there were some barriers here, so we did need to make some changes. We lowered the threshold from 50% to 10%, or 10 projects. 10 products. So we think that that's a more reasonable threshold. Option 2 was really about, now that you've acquired EPDs, find EPDs that actually show that they have reduced environmental impacts compared to a baseline. And option 2, we did restructure a little bit. So the threshold was lower, like I said on the previous slide, but then we also are calculating these slightly differently too. We added an action plan, so now you can get half of a point if you source an EPD from a manufacturer that has an action plan and that set up a commitment to reduce their impacts. So we think that that's important enough, engaging those manufacturers and those public commitments to be worth sort of half of a product. So that's one way to get credit in this option. The other ways, item 2 there, life cycle impact reductions in embodied carbon. So we are focusing specifically on embodied carbon shown in the EPD. So if a manufacturer has done an EPD, they have conducted that LCA, and if they are showing a reduction in global warming potential, that's worth 1 product. If they're showing a 10% reduction in global warming potential compared to the industry average, then that's worth 1.5 products. And then lastly at the bottom there, if they're showing a 20% reduction, that's actually worth 2 products. So we think this is a little more achievable than how the credit was written previously, and it does focus more on embodied carbon, which does seem to be the thing that we want to prioritize more so than the other impacts within the EPD. All right, so moving on to sourcing of raw materials. This credit had an option 1, and option 1, I think 0 projects have achieved in 6 years. So we removed that altogether, moved it to the pilot credit library. So we'll still be taking feedback on that, but it's not in LEED anymore. So essentially, we are now only focusing on option 2. And option 2 is some of those single attribute requirements that do reduce the need for virgin materials. So 1 point for 20% of your products that meet some of these criteria, and 2 points for 40%. And the criteria are on the screen now. So reuse is a criteria, extended producer responsibility. So that is, buying products from manufacturers that have take-back programs. Recycled content does get credit in this credit now. So because recycled content does reduce the demand for new material. FSC wood, so that is sort of optimizing the extraction of wood. So FSC is still recognized here, and bio-based materials as well, which again is sort of reducing the demand for those raw materials. So many of the single attribute credits or criteria here are now worth even more points because we've eliminated option 1. And option 1 was the sourcing option, which required projects to disclose the sourcing locations and the extraction practices of their products. And that one was unachievable, so now we're just focusing on option 2. All right, then the last of the building product disclosure and optimization credits, the material ingredients credit. This one did not change too much. We think this one has been fairly achievable. So option 1 is disclosing those material ingredients from your products. For IDNC, this is now 10 products. I believe it was 20 products. We have reduced that down to 10 for 1 point. And if you do have a third-party verified disclosure, that does count for 1.5. So again, that can be just a manufacturer self-disclosure to get 1 point. So that's option 1, just disclosing those material ingredients. Option 2 is starting to optimize those ingredients. And again, we've come up with a few different options here that allow more incremental steps for optimizing those ingredients. Number 1 is, again, that action plan. So if you source from manufacturers that have an action plan, they've done an inventory of their chemical ingredients, and now they have an action plan for how they will start to optimize those ingredients or avoid certain hazardous ingredients, that action plan would be worth half of a product. And then our final 2 tiers here, advanced screening and assessment. These are just various assessments that are being done by the manufacturers. You could do the advanced screening and assessment, which would screen up to, I believe, 75% of the product's ingredients and disclose any of those ingredients and optimize for those ingredients, so removing those known hazards. And then the full assessment would get you 1.5 points, so 1.5 products. And that full assessment is that the manufacturer has done a full inventory and has avoided, certain chemicals of concern within that inventory. That's a lot of information for project teams to digest. I think what's more important is that there are third-party programs that do all of this for you, cradle to cradle, declare, etc. There are many programs that manufacturers will use, and those are recognized in the rating system. So ultimately, as a product specifier, I would just be looking for those third-party labels that do either count for item number 2 or item number 3. All right, so moving on to indoor environmental quality. And this category didn't see a huge amount of change, but we did tweak some minor things. So looking at the credit achievement data here, one of the things that jumps out at me is the low emitting materials credit. That was one that was highly achieved in previous versions of LEED, but in version 4 it had a low achievement rate. So I think that's definitely one where we needed to make some changes, as well as a few other credits. The first change that is relevant for this audience is probably the environmental tobacco smoke prerequisite. The one thing that we did here was to first update the definition of smoking which now includes cannabis and electronic smoking devices, which is something we had to do. But more importantly, we do recognize that interiors projects may need to locate in base buildings that do allow smoking somewhere in those buildings. In version 4, we said that interiors projects could not locate in base buildings that had any smoking, and that was a huge barrier, and we were coming across many scenarios that just didn't make sense in terms of excluding those projects from LEED. So we did allow that now as an exception. Projects can locate in base buildings that have smoking, but you do need to make sure that there is no migration of that tobacco smoke into your project. Obviously, there's no smoking in the LEED certified space, and there's no smoking in the common areas. But you also do need to extensively document that there's no sort of shared HVAC or any migration of that smoke into your space. So, for example, this is the Empire State Building or another very tall building in Asia that does have smoking on a restaurant on the ground floor. That would have prevented a project in the 50th floor from certifying. So we've removed that barrier for 4.1. And then another credit that was getting a lot of feedback was the Indoor Air Quality Assessment credit. So this is the air quality testing option. So option 1 is the flush out. Option 2 has now changed to air quality testing. That's worth 2 points. So previously, we looked at a list of 35 compounds that needed to be tested for, and we were getting feedback that was very costly and very difficult for projects to do. So we did reduce those numbers. So now we introduced 2 pathways. Path 1, you're testing for 4 compounds. Those are particulates and inorganic gases. And path 2, which looks at VOCs, of which we're only asking for 12. So that list was significantly reduced, hoping to encourage projects to actually do some of this air quality testing. Daylighting was adjusted. We removed the 10% threshold for annual sunlight exposure, so that's that addressed glare. Many projects were saying, we can't get under that 10% number, so we removed that. We replaced it with just a requirement that if you are above 10%, you do need to have some sort of glare control. We also lowered the thresholds for many of the daylighting options for the calculation. And then option 3, which was the measurement option, it now only requires 1 measurement instead of 2 measurements 6 months apart. So we realized that 2 measurements might have been quite difficult for projects to earn. So now there is an option for only 1 measurement. And then lastly, acoustics. This was an important credit for us to add, given that acoustics is such a big concern on many of the post-occupancy surveys that we see. We added this in version 4. However, it was not achieved at a high level. We think that maybe the scope was a little too big, so we did reduce the scope. So now your projects are only required to pick 2 of the 3 items within acoustics: sound transmission, which is noise through a space; HVAC background noise, which would be equipment; and reverberation, which would be the sounds sort of bouncing around a space. So pick 2 of those 3 issues and apply those to your project. We did update a few other requirements in that acoustics credit as well. So I'll touch on a few things in location, and as you can see there, we did have a couple challenges. One is access to quality transit. We did adjust the weekend trip thresholds to make that more accessible. So we lowered those weekend minimums and also only required 1 of those days to have trips. And we added some intermediate thresholds to this credit as well, so it's a little more achievable. For bike facilities, we did adjust some of the requirements. We did introduce bike share, so now bike share can count for some of these credits, and we lowered some of the requirements for storage and the distance from the actual front door of the building to the storage location. Reduced parking footprint. This is an interesting credit that we changed as well. Previously, this just looked at providing less parking based on the ITE Transportation Handbook. Well, now we've simplified this somewhat. Instead of multiple cases, we just have one threshold to meet in terms of reduced parking. But we've also added another 3 options for projects that may need a different pathway to earn here. So now you can earn this through having no off-street parking. You can also earn it through having car share within your project, or you can earn this credit through unbundling your parking, as in not including parking within the lease of the tenant space. Okay, so those are the major changes that that I think are important to most interiors projects that would come through using version 4.1. Again, I'll just mention that there are multiple ways to engage with 4.1, and I think credit substitution will be one of the biggest ones. Forms and LEED Online will be updating as well. We will come out with new forms in the next couple of months. They will not be PDF based anymore. They will be HTML based. So hopefully that'll resolve some of our compatibility issues that we were seeing. We do have lots of information out there on 4.1. I would suggest taking a look at our website. We have a beta guide, which is essentially the first version of the reference guide for 4.1. It's all freely available, so I would suggest going out and taking a look. And it will be updating quarterly. So as we get feedback, we do update all of our content on a quarterly basis. All right, so that's everything I have. I know we have a couple minutes left for questions, so happy to answer those.
Thanks very much, Corey. We really appreciate that great presentation. We do have a few minutes left for a question or two. Some have come in over the course of the presentation. We probably won't get to all of them, but let's start off with this one, Corey. Can you expand on how interior designers can get involved with LEED system development?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I should have mentioned that. One way to get involved is to just start using these rating systems and giving us feedback. And because we are in a beta, this provides really an amazing opportunity to change requirements in LEED, which usually we're not able to change. So giving us that feedback is incredibly useful, and now, between now and the end of the year, is really our opportunity to do that. But to get involved more formally, we are always looking for highly engaged committee members on our technical committees. So we have technical advisory groups for every credit category. We also have a market advisory committee and a few other committees. And that call for volunteers is open all summer. So it opened in June, and it'll be closing at the end of August. So right now, if you go out to our website, you can apply to be a member of those technical advisory groups. So I would suggest anyone going out and doing that.
Great, and I know our Construction Codes and Standards Committee is listening on this call, so I hope everybody heard that. That's very important to the work of that committee. And we'll do one last question, and then any other questions I'm sure Corey would be happy to respond to by email. But Corey, are there any jurisdictions that mandatorily require LEED as a building standard?
That's probably not my area of expertise, but yeah, I think there are jurisdictions that have definitely had LEED requirements or LEED mandates. I think in general, there's probably always an alternative to that as well. So if you choose not to pursue LEED or get the certification, there is a way around that. I know Washington, D.C. is definitely one jurisdiction that has LEED requirements for certain buildings of a certain size, and I think as there have been newer versions of the IGCC and other codes that incorporate green strategies, I know there are more alternatives than just sort of mandating LEED. So I think yes, there are jurisdictions that do that. I would say that that's not necessarily something we encourage, but we certainly support that. I think it's sometimes difficult to mandate a voluntary rating system. LEED wasn't necessarily designed for that function, which is why we've worked with the IGCC and ASHRAE 189 and other codes that may be more suited for sort of that type of use. But we certainly support jurisdictions that do that, and we understand why they're doing that, and think that they're also getting some good value from that requirement.
Great, thank you, Corey. And we do have other questions. I'm sure our communication staff will be able to log these and get them to either Corey or myself or whoever would be the best person to answer. We are almost at the top of the hour, so that will conclude today's session. We look forward to hosting all of you on our next profession-wide public policy webinar in late September. Additionally, on August 22nd, ASID and IIDA will jointly host our next advocacy training webinar at 2 p.m. Eastern. All are welcome, so stay tuned for further details. We hope you enjoyed today's session and that you'll tell your colleagues and chapter members about these webinars. And as always, remember, for up-to-the-minute advocacy and public policy updates, join our phone to action alert system by texting the term interior design to the number 52886. That's texting interior design to the number 52886. Thank you to Corey, thank you to USGBC, and thank you to all of our attendees, and we hope you have a great afternoon. Thanks, everybody.